My next guest is Theodora Harvey, PhD. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, a certified sex therapist, an Imago relationship therapist, Kundalini yoga and meditation teacher, and she co-founded Harvey Center for Relationships in Santa Monica. With her expertise in couples counting and clinical sexology, she specializes in helping couples enhance their relationships. Dr. Harvey developed tools and practices to cultivate committed, erotic love connections. I'm so delighted to have her with us today to talk about alchemizing relationship. Thank you for being here. One question I want to dive into is what drew you to couples therapy? Because we had a choice, right, of where to go with our degrees.
Well, I met my husband actually, and he was an Imago couples therapist. And he said, "This is the way you got to go. You've got
Okay,
to work with
so
couples."
I want to hear about that. So not everyone knows what an Imago therapist is. Can you explain it in a nutshell?
Sure, it's a therapeutic approach designed for couples.
Okay, but what's the Imago bit?
So, Imago means image in Latin.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the theoretical part of Imago is that we consciously and unconsciously pick a partner, a romantic partner that has a negative and positive characteristics of our earliest caregivers, so of our parents, essentially.
Okay, so that sounds about right to me, in my experience. So, why did your, I guess, then future husband say this is the way to go? Why does he think it's the best way? Why do you think it's the best way now?
Uh, The healing that's possible through being in a couple, and also the ecstatic highs. We're wired to be in relationship, and yet so many of us, of course, don't have the tools. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have the insights. I just thought, up until I met my husband, that if I wasn't getting along with my partner, it was because it was the wrong person. And it was a real revelation to meet my husband, Dwayne Harvey, and to, we immediately, I was part of an Imago relationship using these tools, primarily this dialogue, so that you can really hear your partner and clear out the projections. I've heard other episodes where you've talked about how we project on one another, and it's like, how do you resolve that?
How do you resolve that? I mean, I feel like even, with help, it can be hard to figure it out. Like, isn't it all a projection at the end of the day?
Yeah. And I think part of this work isn't about being afraid of it being hard, but being curious
Mm,
instead, and applying a new awareness, and also just normalizing, like, of course you and your partner are going to go through hard times, of course you're going to project. How
yeah.
are you going to manage this? And Imago provides you with a way of hand to resolving those projections.
Yeah, I want to talk more about those tools. I think it's beautiful to start out with the kind of the embrace that it's going to be tough if you're going to be in a committed coupling. I don't know. I mean, it's hard as a therapist because we project out from what we see, right? What comes into our rooms, and the people who come to us for help. But then you have to wonder, like, are the people out there who are just nailing it and who don't need this kind of guidance? If
I
so,
don't
bring
think,
them to me, because I need to learn from those guys.
yeah, I don't think anyone's nailing it.
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah.
life is designed for us to nail it. It's
Mm,
about evolving and learning and healing. And I mean, in terms of, but when you can bring awareness, skills, consciousness, then instead of you just reacting to what life brings you, you can, be a participant in creating what you want.
yeah, that's beautiful. I like the idea of being a participant. it means not being a sort of megalomaniac and projecting exactly what you think you should have or want onto the universe, but say, hey, I do have a hand in it. I do have a hand in outcomes. And I suppose the hand is, yeah, having tools, but also having the attitude that it's all kind of in the making, which makes me think of, alchemy. I was just reading your article, Sex, Alchemy and Marriage, and this concept of alchemy, which, as I understand it, is turning base metals into gold, seems like really helpful one for relationship, romantic relationship, but also just sort of relationship to life. Meaning, I suppose layman's phrase would be, making lemonade out of lemons or something like that. Like,
Yes, yes.
yeah.
And at the same time, it's about, taking opposites and blending those opposites to make a stronger third.
Okay, so let's bring that into a relationship example.
So, a lot of times couples will say, he's totally different than me, or she's totally different, and then they become afraid of their differences.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of being afraid or threatened, you can embrace those differences as actually, okay, that's a whole other way of seeing and interacting with the world that I wouldn't have been privy to if I hadn't been with this person. And not only that, when you have more options, more, opportunities to see or experience things, then you can move forward with not just like his way or her way, but this third way
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
would have not necessarily even been available within one person's psyche.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to have to bring my current relationship into this because, I
Okay.
really want to just get a free couples therapy session from you.
Okay. Please.
I'm kidding. I'll try not to hijack too much, but I do think useful examples are useful, right? So,
Yeah.
and I am curious about this because one challenge I'm facing right now is a speed challenge in my current relationship. We've been together for 2 years, but as people, we're very different in how we approach things. I tend to rush at life with a great deal of enthusiasm, fall on my ass, pick myself up, get excited again, rush again. And, I've told myself to slow down a million times. So has life. But, default, it's part of my nature. I'm an excitable creature and I like to go at it. And my partner is way more chill, slow, considered, cautious. I call him, yeah, like I'm like a hot banana. He's like a cool cucumber, and no, he's hot inside, but like his style is very different, right? So there's a style difference. Sometimes I'm just like, oh my god, I can't go this slow. I can't think this slow. I can't. I need to be pushing forwards, and I can see the issue in the pushing, but I also know, having been with myself for so long, that it's like it is part of my nature. You can work on it, but it's also part of your nature, right? And the same with him. So with that, what would the third be?
So I'm thinking banana cucumber smoothie.
Is that nice tasting?
But I think it's, of course, we have our personalities and we want to, this model is about individuation, being more like yourself and honoring yourself. Then you become not being true to yourself. I just want to make that clear that a lot of times with couples, people fear like, oh, I'm going to lose who I am.
Yeah.
And, I think when you start healing yourself, when your partner, when you and your partner can give each other your deepest needs, wishes, show up in a loving way and help heal some of those early childhood wounds, you just become more and more of yourself. So but that said, you'll be changing.
Yeah.
So it's not, you don't become a static human being just because you're an adult, and and even in relationship, you don't want to just become like hugging on so dearly to who you are or who
Right.
you think you are,
Mm.
because that might prevent you from growing into your best self.
I get that. So now I'm thinking, yeah, me going, well, that's just who I am. I can sort of now hear the defensiveness in it and be like, but is it really? Or is it like just how you've been taught to be adaptive? Is that just the rhythm you inherited from mum,
Having
dad,
to
whoever, right?
survive.
Having to survive. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I do think those, to me, those are the most interesting moments in sort of healing process, where you're just like, oh, maybe I've been carrying this false story about myself for like ever, and things can really open up from there. And then the self feels like, yeah, it doesn't feel like this static thing. It just feels like, oh, like I love what you said. What did you just say? We're not static things. We're not
Yeah,
finished things. We're not.
yeah, we're constantly evolving, and when we allow ourselves to evolve within a relationship too. So in that sense, if you think of a Swiss Army knife, it doesn't just do one thing, right? So the more you can stretch into, like, yeah, of course you can be pushing and adventurous and go after whatever you want, and that's, I'm sure he loves that about you. Who doesn't? It's something to admire. And at the same time, there's something about just enjoying where you are and smelling the roses and really, just soaking up the deliciousness of a moment, and that's probably what he brings. And so by you being able to stretch into a little bit more of the way his way, his adaptation of and his experience of the world, then you can experience that rhythm, that texture, that way of being, where it's like, oh, I don't have to. Yes, I can go for it, and I can experience that, and I can do this other. So that other part of
Mm.
the Swiss Army knife, like, you can be a file, you can be a scissors, you can be a knife.
I love the Swiss Army knife. It's so fun. I forgot how fun those things are. I was fascinated by them as kids. But yeah, I mean, it's another way of saying you're learning to be more multidimensional through someone else.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's this thing that I guess has to do with the dreaded and wonderful word surrender, which is like, yeah, there's so much more to life than your philosophy, A, and B, again, kind of scary and wonderful realization ongoing that everything is relational.
Yes.
Everything is relational.
I think that's the other key part of this alchemy that I discovered by researching it. I was talking about in the article, is that is, it's understanding these mixing of elements. It is it is through relationship that we actually create things, something new, whether it's a human life or, bringing together water and sulfur, or fire and mud, and he, that, like, creating pottery, ceramics, just taking elements, these opposite elements, relation, and creating something new. That's sort of understanding that that's actually where our creativity, that's how things, the genesis of things really begins, is through relationship.
Yeah, it's pretty mind blowing when we have these egos and we tend to think of ourselves as separate. And I think that's one of the reasons intimate relationship can be so challenging, right? I mean, I've spent big chunks of time being single, and as much as during those times I've on and off longed for partnership, I've also had this beautiful sense of like, I kind of got this, kind of got it down. And then when I enter intimate relationship, it's like, oh, fuck. That part comes up of like all the vulnerability, unmet needs, hopes, dreams, more frustrations. It's just so challenging to the ego and to control, I think.
Yeah, certainly. And I think, knowing that relationships go through stages. So that
Mm,
first stage is the honeymoon, the limerence,
mm,
you're just all those love drugs of
mm.
oxytocin and
How long does that
serotonin.
last, by the way?
It really depends, 6 months to 2 years.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Relationships never have it, sadly.
Yeah.
But after those, hormones recede, and the fantasy recedes, and
Mm,
you're left with this other person, then relationships go into this power struggle.
mm.
And the way you resolve that power struggle is saying, like, I am committed to figuring this out with you.
Mm.
Let's figure out what this is. Like, what are your needs, your desires? How can I show up for you
Mm.
in that way, and
Mm.
vice versa? And then that's when it gets really interesting.
Right. So that's commitment, right? You need the commitment to figure it out.
You need the container, because if you do not, you can just easily just say, oh, I'll just step one foot out.
So yeah, so let's talk about what that container is, because I think that that's also a place where people get stuck, because it's like the limerence is gone or it's waning, and then it's like, okay, do we commit? What does commitment look like? Is that marriage? Is it we'll be together for another year? Is it we're committed to working on this together? And like, how do you see that? Obviously every couple's different.
I think that's just it. I think it's up to the couple to define what
Mm,
commitment is for them.
yeah.
As a therapist working with couples in the room, I'm always more like, if you have somebody that's willing to sit here and figure this stuff out, great. Hold on to that person.
Mm.
Because it's a journey to figure out these things. And if you have someone that has the courage to want to figure it out with you, then embrace that.
That's just what I was thinking of, that word courage, actually, the word that comes from the heart. That's a really, it's a beautiful way of looking at it. It's looking at it from the inside out, not the outside in, right? It's not like, do you fit the idea of the person that I thought I should be with? But it's like more, are you willing to be with me here now in this mess and
And
keep
figure it out.
moving and figure it out? Although I guess there is no ultimate figuring it out, is there?
No, because it's infinite. I do think that I've, personally and through working with couples, there are major hangups that can be resolved and worked through.
Mm, mm.
And so sometimes couples will just be happy at that, like, oh, that's a success. And certainly it is. And I guess, one thing I just wanted to communicate through this opportunity to share with your viewers and listeners is that there's infinite potential,
Mm.
in a relationship, when and maybe it might be the highest, aim, like mixing deep love with ecstatic sex may be, the ultimate highest of the high,
I
you
mean, it
know.
sounds good to me. I'm down.
Good, good. That's what I
Yeah,
wanted to share. Yes.
I love that. And I love what you're saying. I think the infinite potential is such an important reminder, especially as this stuff can get quite tough when you're in the pre-alchemized part. Would you be open to sharing an example from your long-term relationship with your couples therapist husband on something that you've managed to transmute or elevate or succeed in? Or
Sure. I was thinking about that today, because I was like,
mm,
maybe I should ask about that.
mm,
Honestly, there are so many things. Do you remember early on in a relationship, what, part of Imago is this dialogue structure where it has this active listening piece. So you're really, instead of reacting, you're really listening. So again, that helps remove projections, because so often I'm with couples in the room. They're not even hearing each other. They're already thinking about how they're going to respond. And it's just like, just slowing down and letting them hear. And I remember the first time I was, really, it was early on when my husband and I were dating, and I just was triggered, and I was having a fit, and I was yelling, I was crying, and I was very upset. And he just sat there and he mirrored me, saying, like, oh, whatever, I was saying, it didn't even make sense, because I was just like out of that window of tolerance of being able to hear one another. And that was so transformative for me because I just did not have a parent that ever held me in my emotional upsets. I would have these temper tantrums at a very early age, and my mom would just like walk away. So just having him hold space for me was just I was like, whoa, this is different.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not alone in this.
Yeah, you had a reparative emotional experience. I'm sure that generated so much trust between the two of you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And then, conversely, being able to do that for him at different
Yeah.
moments. And, our wiring is so tricky that we will project or provoke similar situations from our childhood. So
Mm.
even if it wasn't my childhood, for a while, we were going through this thing where my husband kept on breaking things. Like just around the house, and it was driving me crazy, and I'd be like, what happened? And then I had this realization. I was like, I just need to ask him if he's okay, not like what happened, this broke, just saying first and foremost when something breaks, like, are you hurt? And then I realized that was some part of his childhood that needed healing, where he was like blamed or not cared for. If he made a mistake, it wasn't checking in to see if he was all right first. So that was also, healing.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like anywhere you can add space and compassion, it's probably going to be a good idea.
Empathy, yes. That's another
Yeah.
part of the dialogue, is being empathetic.
Well, it's empathetic, but it also sometimes, like, you don't, like in the case of the breaking things, maybe this is empathy, but I was thinking you didn't know where that came from, right? So you can't necessarily put yourself in his shoes that he's a kid. I mean, you could if you're, at a stretch, but you're not, it could be a million reasons why he's breaking things, right?
Right, right.
So it's more like you're extending your the imagination of your heart out in a kind of a general way towards that person, like, oh, there must be something, there's some reason why we all act weirdly, badly, antisocially, whatever it is, right? There's a reason.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, when you work from an Imago relational point of view, you're thinking of this takes work, this takes
Yeah.
insight,
Yeah.
but I think, and you do start thinking like, you want to be curious, you wonder about that small child, that's part of the work. But even before that, just in terms of the counter of that, is that usually we, without that kind of insight, without that kind of work, we usually think the worst of our partner.
Yeah.
So like, just like another example of like early on in our relationship, I just moved in, I went to the refrigerator, and there was, just like a drop of orange juice left. And I was so mad. I was like, how could he drink all of the orange juice and then leave the carton? Like, he's torturing me. And then, I just started in this Imago process, and I was like, okay, wait, like, calm down. Like, what's going on here for myself, And I realized, like, it took me back to being in a household with sisters, and, everybody, like, not, I guess, essentially fighting for resources.
Yeah.
And then with my husband, I was like, well, he asked you to move in. Why would he be wanting to destroy, terrorize you?
Why is he wanting to torture you with orange juice, and where's that his
Exactly.
intention?
And
Yeah.
so then that's like this idea of giving your partner the benefit of the doubt. It's like, instead of going this nose diving into this, narrative, like, oh, he doesn't love me, he's taking the orange juice, he doesn't care. It's more like, oh, giving, like, this was reminiscent of my childhood. I can let that go. I can let go of that story.
Yeah. This is a really good example, and it makes me think about that. Yeah, I was talking to you about the difficulty of going from like being single to being coupled, and how when it's just you, it's like you feel like you got it. You got your like your basic defenses up and your needs, and you got it covered. Then someone else enters a picture, and then you're sharing orange juice, and like they have a whole different like story around the edges of orange juice than you do, and you're like, am I going to get enough orange juice? Like, it's, you know what I mean? It gets, so
Right.
it's quite, it gets to a pretty like basic place, right? Very like
Raw.
tribal, feral, raw. Yeah, that's a great
Yeah.
word for it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So let's get kind of nitty gritty on tips, because I always think, it's such a shame that therapy costs so much. I'm always trying to find ways to get more therapeutic ideas to people at home
Yes.
who can't afford, or they're too busy, or whatever it is, right? To get into couples therapy, or maybe too scared. What would be let's get some like the most kind of user friendly tips from Imago to use at home.
Okay, well, I'm going to do Imago and I'm going to do with sex therapy because
Yeah.
I think that this
Yeah, I
is
want to talk
also
about sex too.
important.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that, a lot of times with couples, even in therapy, a lot of therapists aren't trained as couples therapists.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then a lot of couples therapists don't ask about sex. And I do think that sex, intimacy is an important aspect of keeping long term committed relationships fun, fresh, vibrant, exciting, a place to grow, to become more of your authentic, confident self. So I think that that is important. Yes, emotional safety is key as well to creating a erotic, exploratory sex life together with your partner. So they do go hand in hand. But, in terms of Imago, I think giving your partner a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt, just going back to that orange juice example, our brains are biased to the negative. So we will quickly, if something's off in our world, it's very easy just to say, it's my partner's fault. I'm unhappy, my partner, this isn't right, my partner.
So true.
So I think it's you, particularly coming from a single to a partnered relationship. One of the things that we advocate is, and this isn't actually so much, it's utilized in Imago, but it's also based in Gottman research. John Gottman is a social scientist who investigated why some couples break up, other couples stay together. And he found that from one negative comment, you need 5 positives to make up for the negative.
Oh, right.
So
Yes.
inevitably, there is going to be negative interactions between you and your partner. You're two separate people. You have, we live in a complex, stressful world. It's not always going to be roses. So a big part is giving your partner appreciations, and that helps highlight what is beneficial of being in a partnership.
Let's give an example of 5 appreciations.
Okay, well, we say 3.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. 3. All right. So let's say so. Oh, yeah. So you've just said, oh my God, I can't believe you drank all the orange juice, and then you counterbalance it.
Well, it could be like very simple, like thank you for making coffee this morning, thank you for driving the kids to school, thank you for that really fun birthday celebration, that was a
Mm.
surprise, that was so great, I just felt so loved. So a lot of times we assume our partner knows, but they don't. And also it gives you a little serotonin boost to you and your partner giving an appreciation or receiving, and it creates those positive interactions. It's like putting positive interactions in the bank account that you can draw from when the inevitable negative comment comes up.
I love that. Serotonin banking.
Yes.
That's the one we need, baby. That's it. I love that. Okay, so then do you want to move to sex tips?
So I think with sex, it's really about having an indoor date, prioritizing it,
Indoor day or date?
indoor
Okay,
date,
indoor
scheduling a
date.
time where you can be intimate together.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
because inevitably in a long-term relationship, spontaneous desire is going to fade. um, Even when you're dating or having an affair, you have a certain idea, expectation, like, oh, okay, we're gonna have sex, right? Like you're going away for the weekend together. Oh, we'll probably have sex, or I'm gonna see him Thursday night. We have, you haven't seen him all week. You're like, probably we'll have sex, right?
Right.
But when you're living together, you're seeing each other every day. So the just couples end up defaulting to, when are we going to have sex? Oh, I guess we're not having sex.
Right.
Your partner brings it, they're wanting to have sex, but the other partner, they just put their kids to bed, they're exhausted, they have a 7 a.m. meeting, they're not thinking about sex. So when you can plan it and have it on the calendar, then you can make it special, and it's something to look forward to. And then you can make it, really the sensual banquet that you two can experience
I love
together.
that idea, but it actually brings up I'm working with a couple who the guy wants more sex, and he wants to schedule it, and she says it's only sexy for her when it's spontaneous. But it can only be spontaneous at certain times because of how she's feeling, right? So it's a tricky one.
Yeah, so with that, I always kind of push. I say, okay, well, let's try it for a week. Let's see
Yeah.
your way with the
Oh,
spontaneous sex. And inevitably, it doesn't happen. And then I say, let's try it my way, see what
yeah.
happens.
Inevitably, it
And
doesn't happen. Yeah.
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 And then
Yeah.
what's beautiful about it when you can schedule it is that you can make it when you feel, the most alive, frisky. It works out where the kids are not there,
Yeah.
perhaps you want to, you also can start to investigate like what helps each other feel sexy. So you can create those moments. So maybe that is imbibing in some cannabis
Yeah.
as like a relational, sexual aphrodisiac. In which case, if you're going to have a meeting in an hour, that's not going to work, right? But if
Yeah.
you can carve out some time together that you both know, like, oh, we both enjoy that, then it can be a really fun date and special time
I
that you
love that.
can bring in the elements that turn you and your partner on.
Right, exactly. It could be cannabis, it could be a cup of tea, cacao, it could be a cocktail, whatever it is, right? But
Exactly.
something to kind of ritualize it. And I'm thinking, yeah, and it could be any time, right? It could be Tuesday afternoon, and it could be just this designated space to play. And I really took that from your article. I'm so glad you addressed the kind of the pressure part of this, because I think a lot of couples feel, who aren't feeling sort of naturally so turned on by each other anymore, or too busy, or whatever it is, sex can start feeling like a pressure, and scheduling sex can feel like pressure too. And like you said, there's nothing less sexy than demanding sex. And you reframed sex from the idea of sort of having intercourse to having sexy time, which is, first of all, a great phrase, sexy time. It's also lovely because it's really opening it up. And that might mean for two people, like, having a laugh together could be sexy time, or any kind of forms of play, I think, can be sexy. Or maybe it's doing sexy talk, or maybe it's watching erotica together, right? I mean, whatever, who cares, as long as you're enjoying it.
Exactly. And I've found actually with couples, discrepancy in desire is one of the top reasons why couples see sex therapists, or see sex therapists in general.
Mm.
That and low desire. And, I think I want to normalize too, if, your sex becomes unaligned in a committed couple, because it could be various reasons. You could have had a baby, you could be stressed at work, it could be a sports injury, you could be sick, it's not a linear activity. You know, we're cyclical beings. And so just to normalize, like, yeah, just because it's gotten off track doesn't mean you can't bring it back on track.
Right. And what about that idea of like, then they're less into you?
Yeah, I see. I don't think that that's the case. It's like that's where you have to do a little bit more investigation, and it becomes
Mm,
really interesting. You know, so many people I've asked, like, and even for myself, this was a big discovery after, you know, I was always sort of a sexual person, but then after my daughter, you know,
yeah.
typical, like, it just wasn't on my
Nosedive. Yeah.
radar.
Yeah, totally. Libido crash. Yes. Yeah, totally.
You know,
Yeah.
there's like so much changing with your body through that.
Yeah.
But asking yourself, like, okay, well, what does turn me on?
Mm,
What music, what time of day, what smells, what, you know, it really becomes like this sensual experience. And learning
mm,
that, where do I like to be touched? Where don't I like to be touched? You know, how do I want to be touched? You know,
yeah.
and then, you know, so doing that kind of investigation with you and your partner, sharing that, then you can really curate these indoor dates to
Mm-hmm.
really make it very personalized. You know, that's
Yeah.
another thing about, you know, we're fed so many sexual images through entertainment, but it really robs us from what is the best sex, which is an embodied experience, you
Mm,
know, and investigating that for ourselves. And so, you know, a lot of images that we see or ideas that we get is like, oh, this anonymous sex is very sexy, new partner, you know, just like that mystery. And
mm,
while that can be, I'm not saying that isn't sexy, but when you have a partner that really knows what turns you on and how to turn you on, and it's like, and then can go deeper in that, I just the you know, that I just didn't think is an area in terms of like the next potential of committed relationships that I don't think is out there enough or people have explored enough.
meaning, I want to hear more about this. Meaning, like, are you talking about like shutting out the noise of like the world of porn and all the images that we've been fed, or?
No, I mean, I think you can definitely use those images, but I think
Yeah.
what happens is that we're so inundated with those images that I think what ends up becoming sort of the creative lifeline for sex through decades is really connecting to your own creativity, your own play, your own sense of fun, what really turns
Mm,
you on instead of what
mm,
you see in an image on a computer screen, but really finding out what really how you like to be touched. Not, you know, performative sex, like saying like, oh, this is what they're doing, I'm supposed to be coming because that we're in that position or something.
right, right.
Performative sex isn't that's not pleasurable, you know, that's not where you are gonna really experience, you know, your like true arousal. You know, it's going to be, you're going to be a little bit separated from like this sort of integrated of embodied
Well,
experience.
yeah. I mean, if you're performing, you're somewhat separated from yourself. But I would also think, I was just thinking, if you're performing, then you're putting the other person in the position of consumer, which is also kind of otherizing and reductive.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's ultimately just as in as a connective experience, as you know, coitus can offer.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's reductive back to your point that, you know, we're these sort of ever-changing beings. If we want to have really connected sex, we have to accept the fact that we're going to be different every time, which is potentially super cool, right? But I was thinking about, yeah, my sexuality post having a baby, and, you know, having in my head this idea of, well, what my OBGYN said, which is you can have sex after 6 weeks. And like 6 weeks in, I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, it was like, it was so much bigger than whether my stitches had healed, it was like, oh my God. It's like your whole sense of self and sexual identity and desire and depletion and all of these different factors. And if I had sort of insisted on being met where I was at sexually then, which of course I had no thought about even, but it's an extreme example, but it would have been a completely different experience, which would have probably meant, I don't know, I'm just imagining now lying very still with someone and like, breathing and checking in with my body and like feeling into where is the pleasure now? Is the pleasure now? And so, yeah, in this conversation, it makes me think how, again, how important permission is.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. I mean, I think just, that what you were just sharing again about opening up that space to more sexy time than it being, sex has to always equate penetrative sex. But, what you were saying, also about consent being super sexy, also in a long-term relationship, like asking, like, can I hold your hand? Can I give you a hug right now? Can I kiss you?
Mm.
Again, just, anxiety causes disconnection. So the more you can help yourself and your partner feel safe, our minds are time travelers. So at any moment, your partner could be thinking of a million different things. Just because they're in a room with you doesn't mean they're on the same track as you. So,
Mm.
just checking in with them first to see if, available for, like to rub their bum, is going to just help them melt into you more than if you just come out from them from behind. That can be really triggering for somebody, and
Or
then that.
hot, depending. Consent to surprise you by coming up to you from
Yes,
behind,
yes, yes, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the nuances of this are figured out, especially in long-term couples. And of course, in earlier couples, there's so much that needs to be, so many building blocks that need to be put in place. But I feel like, we're talking in different ways about sort of adding space to the process and adding awareness to the process. And that also made me think of, when things go quote unquote wrong in sex, you're having sex and the hard on goes, or you're having sex and the attention goes, or something changes, right? It's all like, hey, we're doing this thing, it's going great. And then something changes. And it feels like the tendency is to sort of quickly try and get back on track, because that track was good and it was working and we were fucking each other. Or, yay, we were doing it. And then suddenly we're not doing it. And what do? Does everyone start sulking? Do we start analyzing the situation? Do you not find me attractive anymore? What's going on? And, it's like, I think I've started to see those moments as like actually really cool opportunities to, I don't know, just explore, you know? And also to look at I think the emotional stuff that comes up around the edges, like, and see, do I really need to buy into disappointment or a story about why this is going wrong, or again, a negative story about us, or dot, dot, dot.
Right, right. Well, I think just normalizing that, many doesn't have to go one way, right?
Yeah.
It can go, and losing an erection happens a lot more than anybody talks about, but it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you have to stop playing and pleasuring each other just because there's no erection. And also just again, like that, just exploring sexy time. But when people, I'm also like helping people introduce sex or deeper intimacy back into their relationship. Maybe there's been a trauma or an affair or something, and they're getting more comfortable. I'll sometimes have a safe word that they can use and come back to a safe position. So let's say, you weren't really talking about this, but just adding this in here of, kind of deciding beforehand, like, yes, I want to explore with you. Yes, I want to, get more, try something new, or just try being intimate again. But having, maybe it's holding each other in a hug, they're getting intimate, but it's not feeling safe anymore, they can say, like, well, the word came banana.
Let's do it. Bananas for safety. Yeah. Yeah.
And then that's just a cue to, like, okay, let's slow down. Let's hold each other right now.
Mm, mm,
You
mm.
know?
I love that. Let's go bananas and hug. Let's just fucking hug.
Yes.
Let's hug this
Yes.
out. I love it. Seriously, though, it's so funny. When I did couples therapy when I was married, the most useful thing we got out of it was the re-entry hug, which is like you've been apart, you're in different worlds, and then there's that difficult transitional moment, when you first see each other, hug and hug until you relax, until you feel the brace drop, right? There's that initial brace if you're both tense, and then you hug and you breathe together, and then it just drops a little bit. Then you're allowed to talk to each other after that. But not before. But it just always made me laugh that we spent however many $1,000 in couples therapy and basically got like, it's a good idea to hug each other. It's like, oh, wow, rocket science, amazing. But I feel like this is a whole other episode, and we've already chewed up a lot of time. But there were these two archetypes that you were talking about in your article for relationship. One was the king and queen pairing, these sort of Jungian pairings, and another was the brother sister pairing. And I think they're both super interesting. And I'm imagining we're talking about these pairings like way beyond gender identification, right? They're just pairings of deep archetypal structures, but they also seem to be different. Like king queen seems to be quite different from brother sister. So can you address these archetypes in a user-friendly way, or why are they even useful for us?
Well, I think in terms of relationship, seeing the king and queen, again, that's of our highest selves, right? Taking it away from the day-to-day grind and anointing you and your partner as special and royal and the leaders of your domain. And so within that, you have that space to see you and your partner in a new way. So again, like, instead of just like a negative, they're the bane of my existence. Or I had this boyfriend that was like, oh yeah, we get married, you'll be my ball and chain. I'm like,
No
I am not
thanks.
gonna be, no thanks. I am not going to be a ball and chain. Just some of these analogies that we think of in terms of commitment and relationship and monogamy, and then bringing in these archetypes of the king and the queen, of just connecting to you and your partner in a way that is very dignified and again, unique. And so that's the
Yeah.
king and queen. Yes, opposites. Again, taking these opposites and
Opposite, but also like sitting next to each other on their thrones,
yes,
king and queen. So together in the sort of regality of it. And I want to just actually reinforce what you just said, because I think it's so important. I've noticed that languaging that people offer each other around, oh yeah, the ball and chain, and look, I appreciate the humor in it, but it is kind of odd. Like someone the other day asked me about my boyfriend. Oh yeah, are you like keeping him under control, or you're some analogy about like the leash, and I just was like, no, I hope I'm setting him free. Ideally in my heart, that's what I want to do for somebody that I love this much. I don't want to be making them feel all trapped and controlled. I might end up having that effect on them, sure, and we can laugh about that and hopefully address that. But I think the king and queen thing is really beautiful, because yeah, it's about reverence for the other person's sovereignty and power, and the idea that we want to not take the other person down, but uphold their sovereignty, uphold their power, uphold their dignity, and also get out of this horribly hierarchical kind of culture that is everywhere around us, where you if you're not a porn star, a rock star, or an influencer, you're not deserving of exquisite love. And that's just total fucking bullshit. So, inside every home, we want to have this sense of sort of regality and reverence and stardom. And I remember being introduced to this concept a long time ago. It actually drew me into ayahuasca, and it drew me into my whole sort of healing trajectory really was meeting these shamans in Brazil, and asking to be kind of introduced to the way that they're thinking. I could see they were living in a completely different way, and I liked it. And that was one of the first concepts that came up, which is in every marriage there's a king and a queen. And again, it doesn't have to be a man and a woman, but this idea, this sense of reverence, coming out of sort of Hollywood, I was like, oh wow, that's really beautiful. Everyone gets to be a king and a queen in some way.
Yes, I love that. That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing your insights around that and your
Yeah.
experience, because I think that's ultimately, you know, offering this path,
Mm.
that, maybe, it's capitalism isn't the thing. It could be for some, for sure, but in terms of what I was finding with alchemy and these archetypes, the king and queen, and this the idea of us with alchemy, it's not just purifying the metals to become like the gold, like purifying lead to become gold, but it's also ourselves. Like we become better, we evolve. So it's like we are able to continue to evolve to be the king and queen, to grow. We're refining ourselves, we're purifying ourselves so that we can be in that relationship. And then also, as we are being in that relationship, that gift of being able to be sensual and erotic and orgasmic with each other, because we've been able to grow and be relational and tend to each other in this very we're working with these elements, working with ourselves.
Yeah, I'm imagining a continuum as you're speaking, because I also think it can be interesting and potentially challenging a relationship where in one area you can see the king and the queen in each other, and then there are these other areas you're like, you're not being my queen, you're not being my king, whatever it is. But that it's a whole sort of field. We could also say we're kings and we're queens, and we could say we're gutter snipes and we're little rats, we're little shitbags. We're kings and we're queens and we're shitbags, and everything has its place, right? So we don't have to put too much pressure on ourselves to,
Oh yeah, for sure.
yeah.
I don't think, yeah, I mean, I want this to be more of being curious, of fun, of
Mm,
play, of discovery, than just this idea of, again, like not being static, but evolving, growing to, hopefully just people feeling inspired of like, okay, yeah, sure, we
yeah.
can be like little shits in other areas of our lives, but if we bring tools, curiosity, empathy to those areas, we can. The reason why we're probably being a shit is because we were wounded,
Yeah.
or our
Yeah.
partner was
Yeah.
wounded,
Yeah.
and healing that. But yeah, it certainly doesn't have to. This is not done with a ruler unless you
Unless
want
someone
to with a
likes a
ruler.
ruler. Now we're talking. So I do think, yeah, there's a lot more to talk about, but let's just touch on this brother sister archetype, which Jung calls the incest archetype, which was very triggering for me because I can't believe how now all porn is incest porn. But I'm also super interested in the brother sister thing. So help me figure this out. What does it mean?
So, well, in terms of these archetypes that you're referring to, and that I wrote about in an article that you referenced, this sex, alchemy, and marriage, I was talking about Carl Jung's work, The Psychology of Transference, which he uses these 16th century alchemical images called the Rosarium Philosophorum that are this that depict this relationship between a king and a queen, that begins with a fountain, mercurial fountain, just the meeting. We were talking about that earlier, the romance, right? The meeting place, and then it moves into the next image is the king and queen getting married. That's the commitment. Like, okay, there's the fantasy of who you are, it's gone. We're making this commitment. Then the series of these images show them disrobing, going into a bath, and then having sexual intercourse. So it's very explicit. Jung used these images to explain. He used the king and queen, king being consciousness, queen being unconsciousness, sort of these also just energetic representations, these opposites, to explain how when we become more aware of our unconscious, more aware of our shadow, then we become more authentic, more whole, and individuate more, become more of ourselves. It's interesting. So he used the brother sister analogy of incest to that idea of becoming more self realized, to integrating more of the unconsciousness.
Yeah, so it's sex with yourself on a metaphorical level, not a literal level, but maybe that too. But more, through the other person, you
Become
alchemize
more
the self. You
conscious.
become more conscious, and therefore it's sort of. But incest is, I guess, it's just bringing the sex closer. It's just funny to me. It's just funny because it's a taboo. It's interesting that he's
Right. So
planted that
that's
in
the
the.
way he used it. But then
Yeah.
this other Jungian, he was a doctor, Jungian analyst, Robert Stein, he became very curious about this, incest image. And then just to that point is that since it's so taboo, but it was interesting how you're like, it's so taboo, but yet it's being depicted in porn all the time now.
Yeah, and I'm wondering about that. It
Yeah.
seems
So
to be
there's
there's a
like,
gravitational pull towards it, obviously.
yeah, exactly. So again, it's more so, how this is operating in our shadow side,
Mm.
right? It's not something that's fully integrated or understood.
Mm.
But what's also sort of interesting or illuminating between that brother
Brother, sister.
sister,
Yeah.
is that instead, a lot of times in the relationship, this is all very psychological, is that it mirrors the parent child dynamic. But when you think of the king and queen, instead of being, father, daughter, mother, son, which points to that hierarchical dynamic that you were talking about, when they're brother sister, they're on the same level. When
Yeah.
they're king and queen, so there's this alchemical relationship. This, being in a relational, knowing that everything is relational, creates inequality. Creates a place where we are, it's more. And
Right. Brother, sister is more intimate than king and queen. It's more close to self. It feels like the disrobing. It's part of the disrobing, the homecoming. But yeah, the incest piece is still a puzzle, but I think it would require a lot of unpacking.
certainly.
I mean, but and of course goes to that, the perverse nature of sex, right? That the thing that you fantasize about is not necessarily literally. I mean, often it's specifically the thing that you wouldn't do, right? So it's playing
Yeah.
with the outer reaches of the imagination.
Right.
And if there can be a homecoming while being in the outer reaches of the imagination, then I suppose we're even less separate than we thought.
Exactly.
Bit of an abstract thought, but you got it, right?
Yes. I just appreciate that you can go to those outer reaches.
Thank you, darling. I spent a lot of time in the outer reaches. It's the homecoming bit that's fucking challenging, but it's all connected and it's all beautiful. And I think it's all about each one of us giving ourselves permission to be the unique creatures that we are, and not holding on to that identity too tightly. And I think this the thought that you bring to these concepts of play and erotica and connection is beautiful and very, very deep. I'm sure you're really helping a lot of couples Sorry, I can't be a fly on the wall. Maybe I can sometime. We'll televise it. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? I'd love to hear your sort of hope for the future of your work or couples therapy in general, and anything else you'd like to close with.
Thank you. Well, it's just been a pleasure to connect with you in this space, and just so proud of everything you're doing. I just love popping in at this part of your journey and seeing you.
So fun, so fun. I want to do more. So, yes, fairy godmother here. So, come on.
Make love, not war. More
Yeehaw.
love. Yes, yes. I'm hoping that we can take our opposites, this polarity that we're, experiencing, whether it's politically or even in your home, and not be scared of it, but rather let's find a new way forward, taking these opposites and creating this next level, this next iteration of, humankind, this next level of how we're going to, humanity.
Yeah, next level love machines.
Yes.
We're in
Yes.
it together, darling.
Yes.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Oh, tell us where we can find you if you want to be found.
Yes, please come visit harveycenterforrelationships.com. There are several articles there, and also different resources to help couples with their intimacy, also their communication. And also, you can find us on YouTube. There's videos about just ways, again, for couples to connect, and on Instagram.
Hey, since we just got cut off, I want to give you Dr. Theodore Harvey's Instagram. It's TheodoraHarvey.PhD. Theodore Harvey PhD. Enjoy.